It's my pleasure today to welcome Guido Nez-Mujica from the Parasite Enzymology Lab, and he's going to be talking to us about the challenges of innovation in developing countries. Guido?
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to speak this afternoon about science, entrepreneurship, and innovation in developing countries. But I would like to talk more than about abstract issues, about my personal experience and how it has been for my laboratory to develop diagnostical kits, all the problems that we have to endure and all the opportunities that we have had and what we would like to do in the future. So this is not going to be like an abstract analysis, but more a personal story. Thank you. Well, first, I'd like to begin with this. These graphics, they're from UNESCO, show the proportion of papers published in different areas according to different geographical regions. It is clear that maybe 70 to 80% of the published papers come from America, North America, Europe, and South Korea and Japan, which is here industrial Asia. India and China are considered in other regions, and these figures might have changed because they are like almost 10 years old, but I don't think that besides China and India, the trends are now very different than what they were. So this is telling us that more or less like 20% of the population of the planet creates like 80% of total research. This is outstanding, and there are a lot of reasons of why this is this way. But even more shocking, are the patents disparities. According to the income of the countries, we have here like high-income countries have like almost 350 patents per million people. Medium-income countries less than 10, and low-income countries have 0 patents. In the other case, we could see that even if developing countries create a bit of science, they at least do some science and they publish and they can work on scientific issues. But when it comes to technological issues measured as patents, we are not doing really well. Well. Of course, this is a bit biased because these are international patent applications, and patents are expensive for people in undeveloped countries. Well, they're expensive even for people here, and you need in universities special offices that take care of that bureaucracy. But we often lack those mechanisms in undeveloped countries. I think a question I would like to consider here is the number of scientists is determinant, if there is any relationship between the number of scientists per capita and the number of patents. And it's a tough issue because there doesn't seem to be a really clear relationship. For instance, South Korea, that is, has less than 3,000 scientists per capita, per 1,000 people, excuse me, has a very much a higher rate than other countries that has more more scientists per 1,000 people. So this is clear. It makes clear here that there are a lot of social, cultural, and economic factors that affect the rate of patents per million people. It doesn't depend only on the numbers of scientists in society. And there are countries like Finland, for instance, that I didn't put Finland here in the graph because the situation is much more complex. Then they have like almost 6,000 scientists per 1,000 people.
Excuse me, how can you have 3,000 scientists per 1,000 people?
Oh, sorry, that's a mistake, per million people. Excuse me, silly mistake. But the important thing here is that it is not related directly to the number of people. Then we can ask, what is affecting the production of technology in undeveloped countries? Well, a big answer for that could be that most of underdeveloped countries rely on economies dependent of raw materials, and they are very little diversified. For instance, my country, Venezuela, we rely only in oil and several other minerals that are raw materials that we export. We lack even the most basic industrial infrastructure. Even a bolt sometimes cannot be built in Venezuela. If we need a special bolt, sometimes we have to ask it to another country. Even if labor is cheap in Venezuela, industrialized labor is scarce. Most of labor force is in the services sector. Other countries rely on agriculture, and what happens with this? That raw materials can be extracted with very few technology that is very specialized. For instance, after the political problems that we had in Venezuela, many of our oil engineers were fired by our government, and they easily found work elsewhere in foreign companies. So it's not that the quality of the human resources in undeveloped countries is not good or is inferior to the quality of human resources in developed countries. Well, here we can see, here at Google, we have people from all over the world. Things have changed since a long time ago, and we have better educational systems all over the place. But even 30 years ago, a lot of East Asians and South Asians were coming to America, and a lot of South American people also were coming here, and they proved that they were good scientists, they were good engineers. So maybe it's not education what's missing here. A very important obstacle to innovation here is lack of any industrial and technological infrastructure for doing new things. Things which are new, could be done here in America or in Europe or in a startup, are very difficult to do. And here comes the personal experience. Here is the Chagas kit, the pains and joys of innovation. In my laboratory, we have developed the first 100% Venezuelan diagnostical kit. It diagnoses Chagas disease. And as you can see here, we don't have like high-tech facilities. It relies heavily on monotonous work that maybe here could be automatized. We don't have the resources for that. But as labor is cheap there, even specialized labor, we can keep the cost down. The Chagas disease is a disease that affects around 20 million people in Latin America. And every year, 100,000 people gets infected. It is lethal around 30% of the times, and it kills people around 30 years after the initial infection. The problem here is that it makes people unable for physical labor, like long time before their death. So if they are peasants, they rely on physical labor, and their source of income depends on physical labor, and when they can't do it, they become a burden to their family, and they end up even poorer than they were before. So this is a very nasty and very important disease too in Latin America. Current diagnostical methods are not good. They give cross reactions when people have, for instance, leishmaniasis or TB. They could get wrongly a diagnosis of Chagas disease, or sometimes the methods are not sensitive enough to detect the disease. So the people is unaware that they have a medical condition that can kill them. And even if there are no pharmaceutical cures for the disease, people can go frequently to the doctor and get checked and get their heart checked, so they have a better quality of life. We decide to create these diagnostical kits because foreign kits are of good quality, but they are too expensive. And they could be like at $10 to $20 per sample. We created this diagnostical kit, and the cost of every to analyze every blood sample, including labor, is less than $1. All the biochemical reagents are made in Venezuela. The antibodies, the recombinant antigens are made in Venezuela. But we had to go through a lot of things to finally make this possible. The kit is being marketed this summer. As I'm here, I suppose that the first units have been shipped, but it could be done even last December. What happened? That the easiest part of all this was biotechnology. It could be, maybe it is a more complex part technologically speaking, but things as simple as these glass vials, to build them in Venezuela, it was hell. To get a simple plastic box that contains the kit, it was totally impossible. It was the last thing we achieved to do. Why? Because in Venezuela, as I told you, and that's true for a lot of countries in Latin America and for a lot of countries all around the world, we have no industrial resources, no industrial infrastructure. So even casting a new mold for special plastic, it's something very, very difficult. There is only one company that does it in Venezuela. We cannot go elsewhere because costs go up, and we're trying to keep this cheap for people and for our government. So what we have here is a situation where the specialized labor and the specialized methods are not the most difficult part of creating a startup, as the opposite here in America. Another problem that we have is that reagents take very long time, extremely long time to arrive. For instance, here, any of you works in the biological sector? Any scientists here? Any scientists here? How many days, if you order a reagent today, when you will have it? Mm-hmm. Okay. When we order a reagent in Venezuela, it can take as long as 6 months. That's the average time. If we are extremely unlucky, it can take 9 months, 10 months. It's very difficult for us. And this is not only because lack of free commerce and customs and the existence of customs and taxes, but also because as the market for that is very small, and there are only very few companies who has the license to export reagents from America to other countries. They have like a virtual monopoly, and they don't offer good service. They can be as slow as they want. They can be incompetent, and we have to buy things to them. When we try to get our own reagents, buying online using an American credit card and buying the reagents to America and then shipping us to Venezuela, the company did a background checking on the address we were shipping to, and they refused to ship the reagents. The reagents were not dangerous bacteria, was not Ebola virus. It was pure protein from milk, from cow's milk. That's it. Something as harmless as that could not be shipped. So then we tried with a person here in America for that person to buy the reagents and then to get to his home, and then that person will ship it to us. It could not be done because they background checked him. They found that that person is not a biologist, is not a chemist, so they refused to. Finally, we tried to get a chemist, but they did background checking. they found that that chemist was not a working chemist, so they refused. Finally, we gave up. We had to go through the regular channels, and we lost 5 months of time. And that's only one sample of what's going on here, what's going on there all the time concerning the transit times. It's very difficult for us, but despite of that, that makes us more creative. We try to create new methods. We try to create alternatives. So when we run out of a product, we try to explore other ways to achieve the same result. But as this has to be standardized, we accept this result, and we accept this result that we have here, and we only purchase in advance, and we try to calculate when we are going to run out of reagents, sadly. Another very particular trait that we have in undeveloped countries is that patents and copyrights are not enforced. This is a mini pirate movie market, and this is a rather small one from what I have seen. I have seen stands with pirate movies, more or less the size of this room, filled from top to bottom with pirate movies, and no one really cares. Probably these police there are only checking what are they going to take for free. So that is a problem a problem and an opportunity for innovation. Because if you issue a patent, no one is going to respect it, no one is going to honor it, and you could get all your work replicated, and they will not pay royalties to you here, because it's very impractical. We have a lot of problems with crime, we have a lot of problems with corruption, so authorities are not going to pursue patent violations. It's science fiction. So we have to rely on secrecy, unfortunately. But that also creates opportunity. Why? Because if we could share costs, if we could create communities of development, as companies know that their patents are not going to be enforced, certain new methods or new machines could be used to build new communities. What are the opportunities for biotechnology? Well, there are lots of unmet needs in healthcare, livestock management, and epidemiology. Tests for several conditions are now cumbersome and expensive, and sometimes not applied at all. For instance, before our kit was released, Chagas disease wasn't tested for in blood banks, so there was a small percentage of transmission of the disease because of tainted blood. A new generation of chip tests will be adopted immediately by public and private healthcare systems, as in fact happened with our kit. Authorities in hospitals are waiting for our kit to begin to implement mandatory testing for blood for Chagas disease, as it is done already for AIDS and other diseases. Currently, tests for livestock diseases are expensive, inaccurate, and slow. Results can take weeks. So farmers the cows are just going to die. And the farmers will find that the disease, the cow died like 1 month after the cow died. It's very slow, and it's very ineffective. So farmers have a lot of money, and they're willing to pay for new tests. One good thing that we achieved with the with the creation of this Chagas kit is that now we have our infrastructure for biology, and we know how to make antibodies, how to stabilize antibodies, and a lot of other things. So we can create easily kits for another diseases. You only have to find the antigen, which is a rather slow process and can be cumbersome, but sometimes it doesn't have to be that way. So we have a lot of way already advanced. And if we decide to release this basic tools for creating other kits, other people could do it, and as there are huge, there are a lot of unmet needs. We in our laboratory, we cannot design kits for all the possible diseases that we could do. So this could be an opportunity for open source biotechnology. Another opportunity for biotechnology that here is not only important for people in undeveloped countries, but also for people in developed countries, because we live in a global age now and everybody seems to be traveling all over, is that the emergence of new viruses. For instance, in Venezuela, in the plains, we have the Guanarito virus, which is a hemorrhagic virus with a fairly high lethality, and the death rate is around 30%, I think. And if this virus spreads out, it could be very dangerous, the same way than other viruses in Africa, like Ebola or Rift fever. So design of cheap, quick new tests could offer an opportunity to do sampling of permanent sampling of the areas which we know are endemic for virus in order to detect outbreaks before they spread. Now we have been speaking about trends in diagnostic based on proteins. We haven't spoke about trends in DNA because currently DNA amplifier machines, the PCR machines, are very expensive for the standards of undeveloped countries. So we can see here that the number of sequences that in gene bank, which is the database where DNA sequences are stored, has been growing almost exponentially. At the same time, the cost of sequencing and synthesizing DNA has been dropping, and these figures are 3 years old, 4 years old, and so the cost must be even lower now, and there should be even more sequences now. 10 years ago, we didn't even have the human genome well sequenced. Now we have like 300, 400 genomes. I don't remember the exact figure, but we have a lot of genome sequences already, and the speed is increasing. So DNA more than proteins could be the future of biotechnology for diagnostical purposes, and could be even cheaper. And what is the proposal for open source biotechnology? Well, when I was here in California last year, I went to the Tech Museum, and I saw this. I saw that small child there doing molecular biology. That child could be like 5 or 6 years old, and he was creating very easily for him, of course. There was a rack of Petri dishes there, and there were solutions. So the kid was just spreading like the solution, the DNA, the bacteria, over the Petri dish and put it on the stove. And next day he went to the internet and he checked his green fluorescent bacteria that glow in the dark. I did that when I was 20 years old in college. So people do not need to know the basic foundations of knowledge in molecular biotechnology to get useful results. This is very important. And the same way that a person, a coder, doesn't have to know quantum electrodynamics and electronic to create good programs, people could use these new biotechnological tools to create their own solutions to their very local problems that probably they don't have a big market share enough to justify, they don't have a market share enough that it will give them enough to create a company or to get venture capital. But if these chips get really, really if these tools get really, really cheap, they could do it. For instance, in the other picture, we have like this new DNA amplifier machine, the total cost of this machine is $10. Current machines are costs around $2,000 to $3,000. They are too expensive for us in the developing country. Which is the proposal here? Designing the primers, the DNA primers, is not a really cumbersome process. It could be done in one day, designing a primer for diagnosing a disease. What is a primer? A primer is a DNA sequence, a very short sequence, around 20 nucleotides, 20 bases. And it could be, if you have the genome online or on a database, that many genomes of diseases that are online, you could design with only a computer and access to internet your primer. Then you could synthesize it, and as the costs of DNA synthesis are going down, it could be fairly cheap even for people in undeveloped countries. So if we could distribute these machines, they are cheap enough for there being one in every even small village hospital. So the reagents could be cheap too, because the reagents are not the patent expired for the enzymes that make it possible, and other reagents could be manufactured locally, distributed locally, and it could drive down the prices. In any case, with these machines could also be connected to the internet, and they run up, and you just download the program, put the reagents there, and you have your results in 30 minutes, as opposite as 1 or 2 hours as now. So these machines are even not only cheaper, but faster than current DNA amplifying machines. So the proposal could be that you could build around this machine a community of developers in biotechnology, because the developing is not really expensive or difficult. What is difficult here? The trials of the new diagnostic method, and that's why it is an advantage to do this in undeveloped countries, because the burden of regulation is a lot less strict than here in the United States or in Europe. Regulation is almost non-existent, and they ask for very little proof, so you can market your test. With medication is another issue, but with the diagnostical test, it could be done. And even in the case of livestock, there is even less regulation that for trials, for diagnostical methods for people. So a network of users of these machines could allow us to distribute clinical trials of diagnostic methods. So it would spread the burden, and as there is a physical part of this that has to be synthesized, and primer synthesis is still not cheap enough to have a DNA synthesizer in every village or every hospital. The revenue of the new test could be distributed among those who are willing to make the trials. So this could be a new model, and a mix of open source and co-op model that I think that could only be successful in developing countries. I don't think it could be successful here because of patents and because of burden of regulation. But once this system starts to yield results, and if the speed of approval of new tests and speed of approval of speed of creation of the test, because we have a bazaar model here going on, and we have a lot of people working different issues. I think that once it is going on, it could be used as a template for other models that could be working here. And by the time it begins to yield results, technology will make this kind of stuff even cheaper. And I think that could be a very good approach for open source biotechnology. Now I'm going to speak about a case that really moved me, that is about the farmers of Gujarat. Gujarat is a state in India where there are a lot of cotton plantations. The company Monsanto tried to get approval for their BT cotton, that is a transgenic, genetically modified cotton that is resistant to pesticides, around 2002. They started the trials in the field, but the Indian government refused the permit, refused to allow the big cotton to be sold to farmers on grounds of environmental dangers, hypothetical environmental risks. A couple of years later, well, the problem with this BT cotton is that those are varieties released here in the United States. They are adapted to this weather. They are adapted to this kind of soil. And they are not adapted to the farmers' conditions. So it's like a standard variety. And Monsanto is not going to invest more to adapt that variety to Gujarat. What happened a couple of years later? Then Monsanto realized that there were some crops, some corn fields that seemed to be resistant to their insecticide. So when they took these plants and they analyzed the DNA, they found that those were hybrids of the original BT plants. They found that they were hybrids of the original BT plants with plants from Gujarat, and therefore they were best suited to that environment, to that weather, to that soil. But also they had the gene that made the plants resistant. So they were doing better than indigenous varieties. Why? Because they were resistant to the insecticide, and therefore weeds could be eliminated more quickly. But they were also doing better than the BT cotton, than the original BT cotton, because they were suited for that environment. Monsanto tried to sue the farmers, but it was unsuccessful because there were so many of them that it was just pointless. And the Indian government later tried to avoid the spreading of these plants, but they were also unsuccessful because these plants do much better than either variety, and farmers are happy with them. They have better yields, around 30 or 40%. And the picture down there, the blue package, it's a package of seeds, of these hybrid seeds. Well, you see that the word best has the B and the T letters highlighted, right? They are not saying that this is BT cotton, but that's the way of saying it. And it says F1, that is in Mendelian genetics, is the term for the first generation of hybrids. So they are implying, without telling us explicitly, to avoid being sued by Monsanto or prosecuted by the Indian government. Well, that was some years ago. Now they are not being prosecuted. That's a way of telling the other farmers that those are hybrid seeds that will perform better. And these chips, by the way, were way cheaper than Monsanto seeds. So this is a very exciting for me. This is a very exciting example of what people could do when they are given the tools. We have been relying on scientists and engineers to cover our needs of innovation in the last couple of centuries. But we all are all Homo sapiens, the man that knows. I think that it's an intrinsic trait in us to be able to create, to be able to do new things. And finally, we have tools cheap enough that will allow people, even in the poorest place, to solve their problems, no matter if those problems are not profitable from others. Those problems could be solved with cheap tools, and they want to solve it because they have the interest in solving the problems. So I think that this example is only a taste of the things to come. And it shows that people, they don't need to get a formal education to be creative and to be innovative. And despite all the problems that we have in the undeveloped countries, despite all these problems, what I said before, I think that things are going to change. Things will change if these tools are available. We only have to look the way Europe was like 200 years ago, and we only have to look Europe now, and we have seen that what mankind can achieve is wonderful. Once it was thought that not everybody could learn to write and read. They thought that people in the elite, they used to say that peasants didn't need that. Now, in Western societies, we have like literacy rates of more than 95%. That would have shocked to many of that people. Now we're being told, or a lot of people think anyway, that innovation is only feasible and possible for a few chosen ones. I don't think that. I don't believe that. And I think that all of these tools that we have now and the tools that we will have in the future will change things, and they will be more efficient for an environment that has a lot of problems that are very serious, but that can be solved, but also has a lot of opportunities. Thank you very much.
So one question is, how easy is trade within South America?
Excuse me?
How easy is trade within South America? I mean, there's a number of spots of well-developed technology in South America. Can you guys, how easy is it to work with Brazil and some of the other?
We have how easy will be trading inside South America. We have a number of free trade agreements, and we're on the way of making borders less cumbersome for commerce and for people. And right now it's fairly easy to trade inside South America. The main problem is not the trade itself, but distribution channels. Because as private companies, they have a very restrictive list of products, and they're only carrying their products. And the public sector, the government, sometimes is not interested into this, or an initiative, for instance, from the Venezuelan government will be only distributed in Venezuela, and we will have to look for other distributors. So the distribution channels are harder. That's the main problem, rather than the tariff and the taxes between countries. What has been our experience with the government and the challenges and the help we have had from them, right? So far, the government has helped us a lot in some ways, but also the bureaucracy has been a really difficult issue, because there are a lot of offices and they approve the money, but then it stays in an office for 1 month and then for another month. That's a very hard issue. We have had approval from the government, and actually the funding that we got for this project, it was a very interesting method, because it was a venture capital from the government. They are expecting us to create a company and to share the revenue with them. they didn't give to us, how would you say, guaranteeless money or funding for free, but they want a part of revenue of this company that we have now. We have a company, and the next step is that it will be my job, my future job, hopefully, will be with the revenue of this company, create a new company totally independent from the government and self-funded, self-funded or funded from the revenue from the Chagas kit. Concerning political views, in Venezuela right now, it's it's a very sensitive issue if you're working with the government and your political position is not the same than the government. Mostly, you can have funding or you can have other help, other kinds of help, but you could find with stubborn people that will make things difficult for you if they find that you oppose the government. But so far it has been, even if most of the people in my laboratory we're not sympathetic to the government, to say it in a polite way, we're working together, and that's what matters. Thank you.
Thank you.